welcome. Thank you all so much for hanging around and coming to this talk this afternoon. I am excited to talk to you all about some data that we have to share around unpaid maintainers, the security threat that no one is talking about yet. We're going to go through a lot of different charts, and at the end of the slides, there is a QR code to go download the full report, and it will have a lot more detail in it. You can go look at the charts at your leisure, and I hope that anybody here interested in this will continue the conversation with me on the other side. All right, so let's get going here. This is the AI part of the talk. This is Bob, and Bob is very bummed out. And the reason Bob is bummed out is because he is responsible for ensuring that the airport screening machine checks passengers' luggage and their bodies and keeps them moving through to their destinations. Unfortunately for Bob, he only does this work as a part-time volunteer. So every time this machine breaks, he gets called in, he's got a really long queue of people who are very mad at him, and they're all getting their stuff scanned by hand. So Bob has a full-time job. It's his day gig, it pays the bills, and Bob has a family, and Bob has a life. So he doesn't really have a lot of time to spend making sure that this machine doesn't get perked and that it's working efficiently. So we don't actually run critical infrastructure like airport screening machines in this way, but this is what we accept as normal in our open source software and how we build applications. As we all know here, the source code in open source is free, but all of us here in our society are counting on free bugs fixes, free features, free patches, and now free professional security practices. So how did we get here? So several talks have pointed out the proliferation of open source, the fact that open source won, it's in everything, it is everywhere. And this is amazing, right? It's driving trillions of dollars worth of value in the Western economy and further. I love this headline from the Harvard Business School. Open source software is a $9 trillion resource that companies take for granted. It is incredible that open source has driven this kind of economic value. But it is a little concerning that underpinning our financial services software, our government, and even our weapons systems, that we are counting on a group of folks who are unpaid volunteers, by and large, to ensure those systems keep running safely and effectively. So show of hands. Are folks here familiar with XZ utils? Okay, great. We got some familiarity with it. So this is a hack, essentially, that happened in the spring of this year, and it hit the mainstream media. So Log4Shell hit the mainstream media, and then we have XZ utils, which is a different kind of hack that shows up. Essentially, the TLDR here, it's a compression library. It's very deeply nested down in the bowels of some critical things that go out in the world, namely several Linux distributions. And what happened here was a multi-year attack that was both technical in nature, where a backdoor was installed in the software, but also it had a degree of social engineering that went into that multi-year attack. So that's what we're going to take a deeper look at here today. So up top here, we have a message from a person who ended up actually being a false identity, saying, progress is not going to happen on this package until there's a new maintainer. Current maintainers lost interest, doesn't care to maintain, sad to see. And the maintainer responds and says, hey, here's what's going on for me. My time is limited. I've got long-term mental health issues going on. But I feel like I see a window opening, right? Recently, I've started to work off-list with Giatan on this, and perhaps he'll have a bigger role in the future. It's also good to keep in mind this is an unpaid hobby project. So for those familiar with what happened here, Giatan also ended up being a false identity, and Giatan was the person who built up trust over years of participating in this project and put in that backdoor that could have been really bad for us had it not been caught. So this is a very sort of mainstream press, large example of the kind of thing that's going on. But what I want to talk about today is that this is also happening in other projects all across open source software. This is just one example from a node package called Ecstatic, and the maintainer here goes into some detail about why he's decided they've decided to lead the project. People are telling them they're making bank off the free labor. In a multi-million dollar enterprise, they're looking for, when am I going to get that patch? When's this happening? And when that labor is denied, gets sort of abusive language back from the community. So this package was deprecated in the package manager in 2019. And the maintainer was very clear that there's not going to be any additional patches, including security updates. So despite the fact that this package has been deprecated on NPM since 2019, these are the weekly downloads that we see here in the bottom right. So I want to highlight for you all that this is a software security supply chain problem that we need to be looking at a lot more closely. Okay, so recently Tidelift, the company I work for, did a survey of several hundred open source maintainers. And as a result of that, we've got some data back, and this is actually the third time that we've run this survey. So we also have some comparative data from years past. This graph here is talking about the fact that more than half of maintainers have quit or are considering quitting their maintenance work. This is an alarm bell for me as a downstream consumer of open source, as a person who feels very passionate about the survival of open source. We would all be in a lot of trouble were we to have 60% of maintainers pull up stakes and hit this moment. Again, this is challenging because just because a maintainer decides to deprecate something doesn't mean that the package gets yanked from the package manager. The machine kind of keeps going. It's getting a little rickety and nobody can really see it right now. So 60% of maintainers have quit or are considering quitting. And the next slide, 60% of unpaid maintainers are actually unpaid for the work they're doing these days. 24% of maintainers are semi-professional and earn some income. We don't know how much from this data set right now. But by and large, you can see that 44% of that 60 are an unpaid hobbyist and would actually appreciate getting some form of compensation for maintaining their projects. The final alarm bell I want to raise for you all is that the open source maintainer community is getting grayer. This is, for some of us in here, I see myself in this slide and I do not like this moment. We're getting old. So as you can see here, the solid blue line is the 2024 data. And what it's telling us is that the median age of open source maintainers reporting into the survey is shifting. And there are also, the number of maintainers who are under the age of 25 has dropped by half. So there's a lot of reasons that this is happening, right? This is not just a lack of being paid for their work. There are financial incentives, of course, but then there are also user demands, emerging security practice demands. Open source maintainership is lonely, is what they're telling us in the survey data. And frankly, a lot of it starts to seem like it's just not very fun anymore. And another thing that happens here as well that we need to be concerned about is the fact that maintainers really don't have time to cultivate community in the way that could bring in younger folks into the project. So, that requires nurturing and attention, which we've also heard in other talks here. It requires contributor guidelines and really good documentation on how the library works. It requires, nurturing that community. And maintainers are telling us that they do not have time to do this work. Okay, so if you're feeling alarmed by I'm trying to throw alarm bells at you, you may be wondering, how can you, and more importantly, your organization help? And there are several ways that you can do that. If anybody here is familiar with Tidelift at all, you're probably not going to be surprised by this next very graphical slide. You can pay the maintainers. So this is not the only way to help these folks, right? Participating in a really thoughtful way and contributing in these communities is an awesome way to do this as well. But we do live in a capitalist society, right? Like folks have to earn a living to pay their bills and live. And so maintainers are telling us that they are getting squeezed on that front. So we also looked in the data at where is the money coming from. I know this is a little bit difficult to read at this scale, so again, I hope you all do go download the report. But there's two numbers that over the course of the 3 years that we've done this survey that have gone down. Salary or wages from an employer, so maintenance is an explicit part of my job responsibilities, has gone down pretty significantly from 2023 to 2024. Direct payments from companies has also gone down very significantly from 2021. And I think that probably tracks for a lot of our lived experiences in the tech industry, folks who are really focused on important OSPO work at different companies. It's been really difficult to make a business case for investing in free software. Notably, donation programs like GitHub sponsors have gone up, and then Tidelift's program has also increased some contributions. We also asked maintainers, how do they prefer to be paid? Is it a lump sum, one time? Is it more predictable? And you can see here that overwhelmingly, predictable monthly income is the preference. This is the kind of income and financial incentives that allows maintainers to tackle problems like, how am I going to grow the community? How am I going to stop just reacting to security research that may come in and start proactively thinking about the long-term vision of my project? How am I going to create a roadmap for it? What are the things that I might learn from doing fuzzing or different kinds of analysis where I could proactively remove risk from the package? This is a quote from Gary Gregory, who is a maintainer on Log4j and many other foundational Java packages. I think the recurring income piece is critical for me, at least. Just imagine what it's like to have a job with a recurring income. It makes you feel safe, secure, and confident that you can keep doing this, and it's not time wasted. It lets you plan ahead. Gary talked to us at length about how in the wake of Log4Shell, there were one-time donations that showed up. People were absolutely panicking that were aware of what was going on. But those one-time drops and then the retreat is not really helpful for ensuring that a package like Log4j is doing the proactive work to ensure long-term stability, opening up avenues for them to think about backwards compatibility as they make new releases, and again, growing that community. So, what do maintainers do with income when they have it? This is looking at just paid versus unpaid maintainers in general. And again, the report goes deeper into the security practices and maintenance practices. But on the whole, the big story here is paid maintainers implement, on average, 55% more critical security and maintenance practices than unpaid maintainers. This is the thing that is going to help us drive a business case for investing in our upstream open source. I do call out these two highlighted in the orange bubble. You got to have a disclosure plan that people can find to receive security research, and then you've got to start being responsive to that and fixing those vulnerabilities. And these are two things that organizations tell us they really care about, these patches being available in the upstream. And you can see the difference here between professional and semi-professional maintainers and unpaid hobbyists. Even something as simple as turning on two-factor auth, we don't see this sort of widespread adoption. Certainly when we get down into things like signing releases or securing build tooling, these are where the differences grow. This is a data point that was looking specifically at maintainers who are partnering with Tidelift because we know they are receiving a specific level of income and we know that it is recurring income. And you can see here that they are also more likely to align with OpenSSF scorecard standards. So we are very fortunate to live in a time where we have groups like the OpenSSF working on making best practices really easy to consume, really easy for us to analyze our open source against. This is a model, though, for ensuring that maintainers are actually aware of these industry standards, that maintainers are actually willing and able to do the work to adopt these standards. And so an example of this would be something like turning on dependency management tooling, like a Dependabot or Renovate. And then it's examples like setting up that security policy. Again, even something that seems as simple as turning that on in your GitHub repo, it can create this sort of growing pile of now new things that you have to deal with as a maintainer. So a lot of other good stuff also happens when maintainers are paid for their work. I want to talk to you about a couple of anecdotal stories now. So this is Tatu Silaranta. He's the sort of key maintainer on the Jackson Data Bind project. If anybody here uses Java, you are very familiar with the CVEs in Jackson Data Bind. And for years, this was a problem in this package. And it is, again, like very deeply nested. It's at the very sort of base layer when we think about a dependency graph. And so this is constantly sort of blowing up your Spring implementation and things like that. So after a few years of reliable income, the maintainer here was able to lead a team in a re-architecture of the package, and it actually eliminated this entire class of remote code execution vulnerabilities now. And you do not want remote code execution vulnerabilities in your deeply nested open source packages. And this is a great story. So, this is a package that had dozens of them several years ago. It had one in 2023, and it was a false positive. urllib3, urllib3 similarly is a very foundational package in the Python ecosystem. Seth has blogged quite a bit. Seth Larson has blogged quite a bit about the different avenues that this project has received income and what they've done with it. They have a very sort of transparent, almost like an annual report process where they talk about it. But some of the things they've done are hardening build and release processes, ensuring backwards compatibility for new features. They're really thinking deeply about the moment where a vulnerability hits. How can I ensure that the users of this package have minimal friction to be able to respond? They were able to bring on a new maintainer, which creates greater sustainability over the long term. And they're even able to start experimenting with bug and feature bounties as different ways to engage with the community and learn something from it, see what happens. Okay, so the last case story I want to look at, I'm really trying to drive at this idea of how can we create this business case in our organizations to pay for free software. So what we've done is taken a look at a Python application from a customer over the span of 2 years. And at the beginning of this work, the first thing we did is said, okay, let's look at all the packages here. In 2022, there were 197 packages. And we wanted to know who's behind these packages. Who are they? Are they affiliated with a corporation? Are they affiliated with a foundation? Are they just independent folks? Do they have GitHub sponsors up? Are they indicating they're looking for crowdfunding type solutions? And so we were able to, at the beginning of this, understand where would we go out and create these contractual relationships for security and maintenance. And so as we leave 2024, we've got 29% of the now 232 packages in this application are under contract for security and maintenance. And there's another 48% for us to get out there and get after it. We go out and we talk to these people. Are you looking for income? Yes, no. Would you be willing to sign a contract to agree to security and maintenance practices? So that's how we started this work. And the result of that really should matter to the business is greater predictability, much less surface area of risk for the business. And so that saves time and cost. It's certainly in your engineering team. It saves time and cost when you got the compliance org chiming in and the security org chiming in. All of this work that goes into having to move off of a package that's been abandoned or can't meet the need of the business is causing a lot of time and energy and cost in these really large enterprise companies. So again, the pink layer is kind of what you think of as a sort of uncertainty. And that's shrinking as a result of this. We're never going to have perfectly vulnerability-free code, right? Bugs are going to happen, and what really matters is that you have somebody there who's able to take in the report of something, who's able to either issue a patch or to say, hey, this is a false positive. You know, I'm going to work with MITRE or NIST and get this adjusted. And so again, this is sort of the business case for this kind of approach. I wanted to shout out Fannie Mae as well. I really enjoyed the talks from folks on their OSPO team here, and this is a strategy that Fannie Mae is using alongside how they think about scanning for security vulnerabilities, thinking about licensing and other kinds of risk. This is a way for them to also proactively invest and ensure that the surface area of risk is going down. And they have a real partnership and a real relationship with these maintainers now. Okay, so if you want to explore this subject further, start by asking some questions inside your organization. Do we have a complete list of all the open source we're using today? Do we know how many of those packages have been abandoned or even formally declared end of life? Is the repo archived? You know, what's the signal that we have that this is something we shouldn't be relying on? And then what is our strategy from that point forward? Do we know how many of the maintainers are unpaid volunteers versus have some sort of safety net around the work that they do? If we had to start writing more of our own code or patching open source tomorrow, you know, forking and maintaining it ourselves, how would we handle that extra workload? There's a blog post that's linked in the slides that are hopefully going to be up on the website, and Louis Villa goes into the how-to. You know, how would you pay maintainers? Why would you do it? What would you ask them to do for that? And what are maintainers telling us they are willing and able and demonstrating they will do? There's a great quote in the blog post where Louis does say, maintainers started this because they wanted to solve a problem or scratch an itch. None of them ever wanted to be in our security and compliance programs, but they are here. Like, this is the reality that we live in. And so thinking about innovative ways to create more partnership there is my call to action for folks. So please go start having these conversations and go download the report. Here's a QR code to get the whole kit and caboodle. And there is a talk actually right after this one in another room where the Google team, I think, is going to talk about some of the ways that they've been approaching innovation and creating contributions. So I think that is a nice complementary exploration of what are the things we can do to mitigate these problems. All right, thank you all so much. Any questions from anybody? Yes.
Do you see a correlation with companies that are pursuing source available but not open source licenses or dual licensing because they're pursuing monetization straight away versus what you said, scratching an itch that can evolve into a larger market?
Let me just try to repeat back to you, make sure I understand. You're asking, is there a correlation between...
Sorry, going back to like, open source containers getting older.
Oh.
See a correlation there because people are starting apps, pursuing monetization and source available and trying to form a business around it versus...
Oh, I see. Yeah, I do. I think my anecdote about that, I do think that this data swath was looking entirely at folks who are not a part of the kind of conversation that's happening of monetization and dual licensing up front. It wasn't focused on companies. But the deeper report will clarify that further. I do not think there's a correlation there because I don't think it was in the data. Yes.
In one of your slides, it says that you're creating an incentive for maintainers to have more security.
Oh. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay. In one of your slides, you let us know that you're creating an incentive for the maintainers, and 25% have no plans to adopt open SSF standards. So my question was, what is the plan, for that? I guess create more incentives, or are you just going to discontinue libraries?
Yeah, I do think this is a matter of aligning incentives. So the way that our contract, personally, the way we're doing this is not one-to-one in alignment with the OpenSSF scorecard. So there is some overlap today, and we want to grow that over time, where there would be more and more. But some of the things can't be applied wholesale across different ecosystems, different types of packages, like build tools versus testing libraries, things like that. So there's a little bit of, and developers are nothing if not pedantic, right? So there's a little bit of that going on there in that data. I do think that we will have to increase the incentives to get maintainers to wholesale adopt achieving higher levels of SALSA compliance, as an example. So, understanding the actual labor cost of this kind of work is, I think, a great opportunity to further explore the data here. And I meant to mention, too, this is one model for paying maintainers. Again, the report and blog posts go into this in more detail, but there's other groups that are doing amazing work in this area too. Alpha Omega, Sovereign Tech Fund. There's different FOSS funds at different companies that are emerging, and then of course the crowdfunding, GitHub sponsors, et cetera, that we're seeing go up. Yeah. Any other questions? I think we have 4 minutes left, so maybe we should. Yes.
Hi, thank you for your talk.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the other slide where you had the questions? I think it was a previous one, like the future steps yeah. Are there any of these in particular that stand out to you that you feel like would be most interesting to explore, or anything that you don't have up here that you've maybe thought about, but doesn't seem like an appropriate rabbit hole to go down immediately, but could yield some interesting metrics?
Yeah. So the thing that's not up here that has got to be the layer for an organization is, what is the business context that tells us this is a really critical piece of infrastructure for us? And so if you think of that, very often for a company, that's going to be a framework, like we're on Vue and we need to we're going to ensure the health of Vue because we've committed to it. We're going to be on it for a while. So that's a layer that's not up here, where you start at sort of the beachhead for your company, and then you look at the dependency graph and sort of start asking these questions. And then in terms of what is most interesting, I think we've heard this in a couple other talks too. These packages that have been declared end of life or abandoned, we've got to get folks off this stuff. This is not a place where we should be playing around. This is kind of an unseen, untapped place, I think, for our observability and remediation tools to start giving better guidance to folks. Yeah. Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate your time, and I hope everybody has a good rest of the conference.